All right, everyone. Now we have Operation Yellow Belly over in the UK as the UK's government has released a laundry list of different things that might happen if there's a hard Brexit on Halloween. Now, this could be the best fucking Halloween ever because isn't sentencing for Flynn set for Halloween as well? I'm pretty sure that it is. I think I read something about that actually the other day. So we've got monumental shit happening, and it's the spookiest day of the year, and that's a good thing. Halloween is wonderful. Brexit is now looming in the faces of the people of the UK. I think they should just have a hard Brexit. I guess Parliament there is trying everything that it can to cause the non-setting aside of Parliament. Like I guess Parliament it doesn't take session for the Queen's speech. Like they disband temporarily so she can be fully and only Her Majesty at the time and not just Her Majesty who reigns over kind of the government in a figurehead sense. So she gains her full queenly powers, gives her speech, and then Parliament comes back together to show that there's still supposedly a functioning representative system. Boris Johnson, he refuses to cooperate with anybody. He's like, no, we're going to have a Brexit. Fuck your negotiations. I don't even know at this point really what's going on with that. But then they released this, Operation Fear bulletin. Here's what will happen if there's a hard Brexit. Unemployment skyrocketing. I guess there was mention of people eating out of dumpsters. Chronic food shortages, medicine shortages, fuel shortages. There could be riots, protests, police resources will be overstretched, arsons, shootings, and so basically your society, if the UK becomes sovereign, the UK will collapse. That's what you're telling me. The country has become incapable of governing itself. It's incapable of being sovereign. That's very interesting. That shows the weakness that's caused by a post-national confederacy style situation. The UK has been vampirized, parasitized, and weakened by its membership with Brussels, to the point where now, in order to pull itself away, it has to risk utter annihilation from the inside in order to even be a sovereign entity. What should happen is that Parliament there should dissolve completely, the Queen should take over, and do what the British do best, which is declare martial law and restructure things. Just restructure things. You can sign off your own trade deals, expedite, as long as it's Her Majesty doing things instead of Her Majesty's government, it'll be way easier to sign off on trade deals. She can go in there with a few of those goofballs who wear top hats still, even though it's the current year, and go talk to Trump. You can sign a trade deal same day. Talk to Canada. Well, you might want to wait till Trudeau's gone because everything Trudeau does will be destroyed after he's gone anyway. Is the bullshit that it is. Talk to China. Talk to the Commonwealth states. Strike a trade deal with India. It'd be more lucrative than working with the EU anyway, I would think. The UK's got a first world economy. Was it like number 5 in the world? Not even a big land area, and yet you've got one of the biggest economies. Sort of like your partner France there. Why not deal with these countries separately outside of the EU's auspices anyway? The EU may very well not be around in 10 years. It's still showing signs of internal turmoil on a regular basis. It might even put stress on it. The fact that there would be a hard Brexit might cause additional stress on the EU. Did you see that map that they released? This was like a week ago, showing the estimated number of jobs lost if there was a hard Brexit. No deal Brexit on October 31st. There's like even relatively small EU states were affected in the tens of thousands. Some of them in the many hundreds of thousands. Like with Germany, it was like 250,000 people, like 300,000 French people. All across the continent, several million people would lose their jobs. That's a lot of revenue the governments there would lose, and a lot of them are already having problems. Germany's already arguably in a recession. Their growth has begun to stall out. I would think that would be the tipping point. That's the straw that broke the camel's back sort of situation that causes protests across the rest of the EU too. Of course, the UK being absent from it if it has a hard Brexit. And as far as having to pay off this billions of euros bullshit, you did sign on to this particular deal. When the UK joined up into the EU, it promised that it would pay this particular fine if it left. Fucking pay the fine. Yeah, it's disgraceful that it should have to happen, but you did sign a contract. Do it the right way. Do your job. No deal Brexit. You pay off the EU. and leave, and then you can begin to deal with things. It'll be easier to trade. Once you're a sovereign entity and you're just one of the top 10 economies in the world talking to the EU as a collective from outside of it, it'll be easier to strike these deals. The problem is, of course, if you're a Remainer, you don't want that to happen because it shows that it can happen. The EU is terrified that the UK will have a hard Brexit, leave, begin negotiating normally as a normal nation, and not collapse. They're afraid that they'll get hit harder than the UK will, that Nigel Farage's prediction years ago will come true. If that happens, other nations within the EU will leave, and it will rip the EU apart. It will completely destroy the European Union, which of course is for the benefit of the world as well as everyone in Europe. It's for the benefit of the people of Europe that they dissolve the EU and try again. Try again with something that involves free movement of people from within the continent to begin with, that doesn't involve a currency block, which is, ridiculous. It's ridiculous to expect that your currency is not going to fuck somebody because of the manipulation of its value. And you've got a country like France, fully developed, industrialized, or Germany, a fully industrialized, post-industrial country. A currency like that represents, an aging first world population. And some basically fundamentally third world nations in southeastern Europe, the economic situation is like night and day. How can one currency possibly represent the best interests of all of these economies? You should allow them to go back to having their own currency and simply have one sort of regulatory body that's coordinating trade and travel to some limited degree. And as far as the idea of an EU military, that Macron and Merkel and these others have talked about. Basically, this is the pipe dream of the big economies of Europe wanting to have additional manpower to be imperialistic. The EU's imperialist. That's the problem. It's basically Germany attempting to take over the entire continent without a war this time. It's basic. How is it any different than sort of the thought process that went into wanting the Lebensraum, I guess? It's basically what Merkel seems to look at it as. Old habits die hard with Angela Merkel and her lineage. So hopefully I'm hoping for a hard Brexit. Yeah, there'll be tough times ahead. I don't think people will be eating out of trash cans. I don't think you have to worry about that. The UK is indeed a fully functioning first world industrialized economy. It's capable of fending for itself like any other nation. The problem is you've spent too long under the rulership of a foreign body that has deliberately made you weaker. It's going to take you time to rediscover your strength. It's like watching that scene in Lord of the Rings where Theoden has just been exorcised of the evil spirit of Saruman. And, it takes him a while there. For a few minutes there, he's still looking kind of old and frail. Being sovereign is difficult. Fucking deal with it. Is it really in the British blood to say, well, it's too hard to be independent. It's too hard to be in a commanding position. It's so much easier to let other bureaucrats from other countries deal with our problems for us. Pay them off in order to do things for us. Are you nuts? You're British. Act like it. Christ. So I post on Twitter the Warwickshire police, which is the ultimate irony to me, confiscating people's BB guns. I'm like, you're fucked up. Why are you doing this? And it wasn't that long ago that the British were marauding around the world, with their red suits on, marching through jungles and deserts and conquering everything. And now all of a sudden they've decided to give up and, it's not so interesting anymore. It was more interesting when you were doing the colonialism thing. Hell, now if you want to see that, you have to look at China. The only ones doing that right now are the Chinese. The Chinese government is setting up shop all over East Africa, much to the chagrin of the Europeans who are, I can tell right now, especially the German and Italian governments are getting itchy fingers with regards to this issue. If the EU prevails, it's going to become a huge problem for the Europeans as well as everyone else in other parts of the world. Oh, there'll be new colonialism, and it'll be 10 times more butcherous. It'll be insane. It's going to be rather regrettable what'll happen if the EU remains intact for too long. And unfortunately, the longer it's there, the more it gets normalized. There are people there that consider themselves broadly European and no longer ascribe themselves to an actual nation state. That's scary. Honestly, that's a terrifying idea. Not because, anyone's afraid. Nobody's afraid of a united continent of Europe that's at peace and in prosperity. No, we worry about the bureaucratic tendencies, the centralistic tendencies, and the warmongering tendencies within Europe itself. Huge problem. Have your Brexit. Let the British lead the way. Have your Brexit, put stress on these other nations, do as best you can, kick out the globalists from your government, be the leader nation that you are fated to be, and lead the way and give an example to these other countries within Europe that don't need to deal with this bullshit. Let the EU represent a confederation of Germany and its vassal states, which is basically what it's meant to be. Do you want to be one of them? I don't think so. That's about all. Peace out.